In 1906, German-American scholar Hermann Hilprecht was cataloging ancient tablets at the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Among thousands of cuneiform fragments from Nippur, he found something extraordinary. A clay tablet listing the names of kings who ruled before any civilization should have existed. Kings who lived for tens of thousands of years. Kings who ruled before and after a great flood that destroyed the world. This was humanity's first encounter with what would become known as the Sumerian King List, one of the most controversial texts in archaeology. A document that challenges everything we think we know about early human history. The tablet Hilprecht found was not unique. Over the next century, archaeologists would uncover more than a dozen versions of the King List across Mesopotamia. Some were complete, others fragmentary, but they all told the same impossible story. A lineage of rulers stretching back 450,000 years. Kings who lived for millennia. A flood that reset human civilization. And kingship that came from the sky. The most complete version is known as the Well-Blundell prism, discovered in 1922. It's a four-sided clay prism, 8 inches tall, covered in tiny cuneiform script. Currently housed in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, it contains the most comprehensive account of Sumerian kingship from the beginning of time to approximately 1800 BCE. The text begins with a simple declaration. When kingship was lowered from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. Alulaim became king and ruled 28,800 years. 28,800 years. For one king. The list continues. Alalgar ruled for 36,000 years. Enmen-Luanna ruled for 43,200 years. Enmen-Galana ruled for 28,800 years. Dumuzid, the shepherd, ruled for 36,000 years. Ensiped-Zidana ruled for 28,800 years. Enmen-Durana ruled for 21,000 years. Uber-Tutu ruled for 18,600 years. 8 kings. 5 cities. 241,200 years of combined rule before the Great Flood. Then the text states simply, the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over and kingship had descended from heaven, kingship was in Kish. The post-flood kings still had extraordinary lifespans, but they were diminishing. Jushur ruled for 1,200 years. Kolasinabel ruled for 960 years. Nangish-Lishma ruled for 670 years. The reigns gradually shortened until they reached lengths we recognize as human. 30 years, 40 years, eventually matching the historically verified kings of later Sumerian dynasties. Mainstream archaeology has explanations for these impossible numbers. The most common theory is that the years are not solar years but lunar months. Divide the pre-flood reigns by 12, and you get more reasonable numbers. Alulaim's 28,800 years becomes 2,400 years. Still long, but not impossible for a dynasty rather than an individual. Another theory suggests the numbers are symbolic. In Mesopotamian mathematics, 3,600 was a sacred number called a sar. Many of the reign lengths are multiples of this unit. Perhaps the scribes were using mathematical formulas to convey religious or political meaning rather than historical fact. Some scholars argue the entire pre-flood section is pure mythology, added to give divine legitimacy to later rulers. By claiming descent from kings who ruled for thousands of years, historical monarchs could justify their own authority. It was propaganda, nothing more. But there are problems with these explanations. First, the King List is remarkably consistent across multiple copies found in different cities, written centuries apart. If it was propaganda, it was coordinated propaganda across competing city-states that were often at war with each other. That level of consistency suggests a shared source, a common tradition that predates the individual copies. Second, the King List seamlessly blends mythological figures with historically verified rulers. Gilgamesh appears on the list, ruling for 126 years. We know Gilgamesh was likely based on a real king of Uruk around 2700 BCE. Archaeologists have found inscriptions mentioning him. The King List places him exactly where he should be chronologically, among other rulers we can verify through independent sources. This mixture of myth and history appears throughout the text. Names match archaeological findings. Cities are listed in the correct historical sequence. Dynasties rise and fall in patterns confirmed by other evidence. If the King List is pure fiction, it's fiction with an uncanny grasp of actual history. Third, the Sumerians were meticulous record keepers. They invented writing specifically to track commercial transactions, agricultural yields, and administrative details. They recorded everything from beer receipts to labor contracts. Why would such a practical civilization suddenly invent impossible histories for their king lists? The Sumerians themselves had an explanation for the long reigns. The early kings were not entirely human. They were descendants or appointees of the Anunnaki, the gods who came from the sky. The word Anunnaki translates roughly to those who from heaven came to earth. In Sumerian mythology, they were the children of the sky god, and Ki, the earth goddess. They came to earth in the distant past and created humanity as a slave race to mine gold and perform labor. When humans multiplied and became troublesome, the Anunnaki sent the flood to destroy them, saving only a chosen few to restart civilization. After the flood, the Anunnaki no longer ruled directly. Instead, they appointed human kings as intermediaries, granting them extended lifespans and divine authority. As generations passed and the bloodline diluted, the divine element weakened, and lifespans returned to normal. This is mythology according to mainstream scholarship. Ancient peoples creating stories to explain their origins and justify their social structures. Every culture has creation myths and flood stories. The Sumerians were no different. But what if they were recording history as they understood it? Researcher Zecharia Sitchin spent decades studying Sumerian texts. He proposed that the Anunnaki were not gods but extraterrestrial visitors from a planet called Nibiru. According to Sitchin's interpretation of the texts, they arrived on Earth 450,000 years ago, precisely when the King List claims kingship was first lowered from heaven. Sitchin's translation work is controversial. Many scholars dispute his interpretations, but his core observation remains compelling. The Sumerians consistently described the Anunnaki in technological rather than magical terms. They came in flying vehicles. They possessed weapons that could level cities. They had devices for communication across vast distances. They understood genetics and could create life. The Sumerian texts describe the creation of humanity in terms that sound remarkably like genetic engineering. The Anunnaki took an existing hominid and modified it, mixing their essence with that of earth creatures to create a hybrid capable of understanding speech and performing complex tasks. This new being was called Adamu, the first civilized human. If this account is taken literally rather than symbolically, it suggests that modern humans are the product of alien genetic manipulation. We were created as a workforce, designed to serve our creators. The long-lived kings of the pre-flood era were either pure Anunnaki or first-generation hybrids, with extended lifespans inherited from their alien genes. This would explain the gradual decline in reign lengths after the flood. Each generation would have less Anunnaki DNA, resulting in progressively shorter lifespans until reaching normal human limits. The mathematical precision of this decline in the King List could reflect an actual biological process rather than symbolic meaning. Consider the reign lengths more carefully. The pre-flood kings ruled for periods that are multiples of 3,600 years, the Sumerian Sar. But 3,600 is also remarkably close to the proposed orbital period of Planet X or Nibiru, the theoretical planet from which the Anunnaki supposedly came. Were the reign lengths actually measuring time in Nibiruan years rather than Earth years? The flood itself takes on new meaning in this context. Rather than divine punishment for human wickedness, it could have been a deliberate reset by the Anunnaki. Perhaps humanity had grown too numerous or too independent. Perhaps there was conflict among the Anunnaki themselves about the human experiment. The flood wiped the slate clean, allowing a controlled restart with a smaller, more manageable population. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest literary works known, provides supporting details. In it, the hero Gilgamesh seeks out Utnapishtim, the flood survivor, to learn the secret of immortality. Utnapishtim tells him that the gods granted him eternal life as reward for preserving life through the flood. But this immortality was not spiritual. It was physical. Utnapishtim and his wife continued living in a physical location, the mouth of the rivers, where Gilgamesh could visit them. This suggests that extended lifespan was a real, achievable condition in the Sumerian worldview, not merely a metaphor for fame or spiritual continuity. The gods could grant it. They could also take it away. The archaeological record offers intriguing support for these ideas. The sudden appearance of Sumerian civilization around 3500 BCE has long puzzled historians. The Sumerians emerged with no apparent precedent, bringing writing, mathematics, astronomy, law codes, urban planning, and numerous technologies that seemingly appeared from nowhere. They had a sophisticated understanding of astronomy that shouldn't have been possible without telescopes. They knew about planets not visible to the naked eye. They understood precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes 26,000 years to complete. How did a Bronze Age civilization acquire such knowledge? The Sumerians also possessed advanced mathematical concepts. They used a sexagesimal system based on the number 60, which we still use for measuring time and angles. They understood complex geometry and could calculate the areas of irregular shapes. They had accurate values for mathematical constants. This level of mathematical sophistication typically develops over millennia, yet it appeared fully formed in Sumer. Their medical knowledge was equally advanced. Sumerian medical texts describe surgical procedures, including cataract removal and brain surgery. They had hundreds of pharmaceutical preparations. They understood contagion and quarantine. They even performed successful cesarean sections. Where did this knowledge originate? The Sumerian King List might hold the answer. If the early kings were indeed non-human entities with advanced knowledge, they could have transmitted this information to their human subjects. The sudden leap in human capability could reflect direct teaching rather than independent development. Examine the post-flood portion of the King List more carefully. After the flood, kingship descended to Kish. The first ruler was Jushur, who ruled for 1,200 years. The name Jushur contains the Sumerian element shur, meaning foundation or establishment. Was Jushur establishing a new order after the flood's destruction? The next dynasty moved to Uruk, where we find Meskiangashur, who ruled for 324 years. The text says he entered the sea and disappeared. This is usually interpreted as death, but the phrasing is unusual. Did he literally enter the sea? Was there an underwater base or city where certain beings could go? His son, Enmerkar, ruled for 420 years and is credited with building Uruk, one of the world's first major cities. The construction of Uruk required advanced planning, engineering, and resource management. If Enmerkar had access to non-human advisors or was himself partially non-human, this would explain the sophisticated urban design. Then comes Lugalbanda, who ruled for 1,200 years, followed by Demusid, the fisherman, for 100 years, and then Gilgamesh for 126 years. Gilgamesh, as mentioned, is historically attested. We have archaeological evidence of his existence, yet he appears in a list among rulers with impossible lifespans. This is the crux of the mystery. The King List transitions smoothly from impossible pre-flood reigns to unlikely post-flood reigns to verified historical rulers without any indication that the scribes saw a distinction. To them, it was all history. The long reigns were as real as the short ones. Modern DNA research has added another layer to this puzzle. Studies of human genetics show that all modern humans descended from a small population that experienced a bottleneck event approximately 70,000 years ago. Some researchers have found evidence of additional bottlenecks, including one that might correspond to a major flood event in the ancient Near East. More intriguingly, geneticists have identified segments of human DNA that don't match any known evolutionary precedent. These orphan genes appear to have no precursor in earlier primates. They simply appear in the human genome fully formed. While mainstream science attributes this to incomplete fossil records and rapid evolution, alternative researchers suggest these could be markers of genetic manipulation. The distribution of certain genetic markers also raises questions. The gene for blue eyes, for instance, appeared suddenly about 10,000 years ago in the Black Sea region, not far from Mesopotamia. Every blue-eyed person alive today descends from a single individual who had this mutation. Was it really a random mutation, or was it introduced? Blood type distributions show similar anomalies. Type O negative blood, the universal donor type, has properties that seem almost designed for medical compatibility. People with Rh negative blood have unique characteristics, including inability to be cloned and resistance to certain diseases. They also have a higher incidence of reported alien abduction experiences, though this correlation could be coincidental. Return to the King List and its astronomical implications. The text mentions that kingship was lowered from heaven to specific cities in a specific order. Eridu, Bad Tibera, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak. These cities form a pattern when mapped. They align with certain star configurations that were prominent in the ancient sky. Eridu, the first city, was associated with Enki, the god of wisdom and water. In Sumerian mythology, Enki was the Anunnaki who created humanity and later warned Ziusudra about the coming flood, enabling human survival. If Enki was real, was Eridu his base of operations? Bad Tibera, the second city, means fortress of the metalworkers. It was supposedly where the Anunnaki processed metals, particularly gold. Why would gods need gold? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest gold was needed for atmospheric shielding on their home planet or for advanced technologies we don't yet understand. Sippar, the fourth city, was the center of worship for Utu, the sun god. But Sippar was also known as the place where the antediluvian writings were buried before the flood and recovered afterward. These writings supposedly contained all knowledge from before the catastrophe. Who wrote them? Who knew to preserve them? The flood itself deserves closer examination. The King List treats it as a historical event, not a myth. It's the dividing line between two epochs, as clear as BC and AD in our calendar. Multiple Mesopotamian texts describe the same event with consistent details. A decision by the gods to destroy humanity. One god's secret warning to a chosen human. An ark or boat containing the seeds of life. A dove sent to find land. These details appear not just in Sumerian texts but in the later Babylonian, Assyrian, and eventually biblical accounts. Geological evidence suggests massive flooding did occur in Mesopotamia, though dating remains controversial. Some researchers point to the Black Sea deluge around 5600 BCE. Others identify flood layers in archaeological sites dating to 2900 BCE. Still others suggest multiple flood events were conflated into one narrative. But what if the flood was not natural? The Sumerian texts describe it as a deliberate act by the Anunnaki. They opened the gates of heaven and the fountains of the deep. This language could describe advanced technology rather than divine intervention. Weather modification, tectonic manipulation, or directed asteroids could all produce catastrophic flooding. The purpose, according to the texts, was to reduce human population. Humanity had become too numerous and too noisy, disturbing the gods' rest. This sounds petty for deities but makes sense if the Anunnaki were physical beings sharing the planet with their creation. Overpopulation would strain resources and potentially threaten their control. After the flood, the relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity changed. Direct rule ended. The gods withdrew to their sacred spaces, mountains, and ziggurats, pyramid-like structures that dominated Sumerian cities. They communicated through priests and appointed kings but no longer walked among humans as they once had. This withdrawal could explain the declining lifespans in the King List. Without direct genetic renewal from the Anunnaki, hybrid bloodlines diluted over generations. The divine right of kings, claimed by monarchs throughout history, might be a cultural memory of actual genetic inheritance from non-human rulers. The ziggurats themselves raise questions. These massive structures required enormous resources to build. They served no practical purpose like granaries or fortifications. The Sumerians said they were landing places for the gods, platforms where heaven and earth met. The biblical Tower of Babel, likely based on the ziggurat of Babylon, was described as an attempt to reach heaven. Were these structures attempting to re-establish contact with departed sky beings? Consider the broader pattern of pyramid-building cultures worldwide. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Central America, Southeast Asia, and even ancient China all built similar structures. These civilizations had no known contact with each other, yet they independently decided to pile millions of tons of stone into the same basic shape. Why? The conventional explanation is that pyramids are the most stable large structures primitive peoples could build. But many pyramids show advanced engineering that seems beyond the capabilities of their supposed builders. The precise astronomical alignments, complex internal passages, and mathematical relationships encoded in their dimensions suggest sophisticated knowledge. If there was a global presence of advanced beings in ancient times, pyramid structures might have served a common purpose across cultures. Communication devices, energy generators, or landing markers for aerial vehicles. The similarities in pyramid construction worldwide would then reflect shared instruction rather than coincidence. The Sumerian texts provide another clue about the Anunnaki's nature. They describe different classes or ranks among these beings. The higher Anunnaki remained in heaven or returned there after the flood. The lower Anunnaki, called the Igigi, performed labor on Earth until humans were created to replace them. This hierarchy suggests a structured society with its own conflicts and politics. Indeed, Sumerian myths describe wars among the gods, particularly between Enki and Enlil, two leading Anunnaki with different visions for humanity. Enki wanted to educate and elevate humans. Enlil saw them as dangerous and wanted them controlled or destroyed. This conflict might explain the contradictory treatment of humanity in ancient texts, sometimes beloved, sometimes condemned. The King List mentions several instances where kingship was transferred from one city to another, often after conflicts. These transfers might record actual wars between Anunnaki factions, with different cities serving as power bases for different gods. Human armies would have fought as proxies, dying for causes they couldn't fully understand. Modern UFO phenomena could be viewed through this lens. If the Anunnaki or similar beings never fully left Earth, ongoing sightings might represent their continued presence. The characteristics of UFOs, advanced technology, interest in human genetics, warnings about nuclear weapons and environmental destruction, match themes from ancient texts. Abduction accounts often involve genetic sampling and hybrid breeding programs. Experiencers describe beings that match ancient descriptions of the gods. Large eyes, telepathic communication, advanced technology. Are these encounters with the same entities the Sumerians knew as Anunnaki, continuing their genetic program thousands of years later? The nuclear dimension deserves attention. The Sumerian texts describe weapons of the gods that could destroy entire cities, leaving only shadows where people stood. The biblical destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah matches descriptions of nuclear explosions. Archaeological sites in the Indus Valley show evidence of intense heat and radiation that some researchers attribute to ancient nuclear war. If such weapons were used in the past, it would explain the gods' withdrawal. Perhaps they realized the danger of giving advanced technology to aggressive primates. Perhaps they quarantined Earth until humanity either destroyed itself or evolved beyond violence. The current UFO interest in nuclear facilities might represent monitoring of our progress toward their technological level. The King List continues beyond the flood through multiple dynasties, each with decreasing reign lengths. By the time we reach the third dynasty of Ur, around 2100 BCE, the reigns match other historical records. Ur-Nammu ruled for 18 years. Shulgi for 48 years. These are normal human lifespans, confirmed by multiple sources. But the scribes who recorded these historical kings saw no discontinuity with the earlier impossible reigns. To them, it was all one continuous history from the descent of kingship from heaven to their present day. They were either perpetuating an elaborate fiction, or they were recording events as they understood them, including the gradual transition from divine to human rule. The final entries in various versions of the King List reach different endpoints, usually whenever the particular copy was created. But they all maintain the same format, the same matter-of-fact recording of names, cities, and reign lengths. No distinction between myth and history, no acknowledgement that some entries might be less credible than others. This brings us to the fundamental question. Is the Sumerian King List a record of alien intervention in human history? The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. The impossible reign lengths, the consistent flood narrative, the sudden appearance of advanced civilization, the descriptions of gods with advanced technology, the genetic anomalies in human DNA. the worldwide pyramid phenomenon. All of these point toward external intervention in human development. But alternative explanations exist for each piece of evidence. Mathematical symbolism, natural catastrophes, independent cultural evolution, misunderstood natural phenomena, random genetic mutation, architectural convergence. Mainstream archaeology provides rational, if sometimes strained, explanations for all these mysteries. The truth might lie between extremes. Perhaps the Anunnaki were not extraterrestrials but an earlier advanced human civilization destroyed by catastrophe. Perhaps they were interdimensional beings rather than interplanetary ones. Perhaps the long rains record dynasties or astronomical cycles rather than individual lifespans. Perhaps the entire narrative is an elaborate metaphor for concepts we no longer understand. But one thing remains clear. The Sumerians believed their history began with beings from the sky who gave them civilization. They recorded this belief with the same precision they applied to grain inventories and tax records. They built their entire society around serving these beings and maintaining their temples. They oriented their cities, their calendars, and their lives around this relationship with the divine. Modern Iraq, the site of ancient Sumer, has been a battlefield for decades. Many archaeological sites have been destroyed. Countless artifacts have been looted. Museums have been ransacked. Whatever evidence might have existed to definitively prove or disprove ancient astronaut theories may now be lost forever. Some researchers suggest this destruction is not accidental. They point to the specific targeting of archaeological sites and museums during recent wars. They note that certain artifacts seem to disappear into private collections or classified government facilities. They wonder if someone or something wants to hide evidence of humanity's true origins. The Sumerian King List itself survives only because multiple copies were made across centuries. The original, if there was one original, is lost. We have fragments and copies of copies, each with slight variations but telling the same essential story. A story of gods and men, of impossible kings and world-ending floods, of knowledge given and taken away. In 2023, new translations of recently discovered tablets have added more details to the narrative. One fragment describes the antediluvian kings as shining with inner light. Another mentions that they could travel between earth and heaven at will. A third states that after the flood, the gods gave humans a shortened lifespan as punishment for an unspecified transgression. These details reinforce the alien interpretation for some researchers. Shining with inner light could describe bioluminescence or energy fields. Travel between Earth and heaven might be spaceflight. The shortened lifespan could be genetic modification to prevent humans from challenging their creators. But for mainstream scholars, these are simply additional mythological elements, no different from Greek gods throwing lightning bolts or Norse gods crossing rainbow bridges. Every culture anthropomorphizes natural forces and creates supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. The debate continues in academic conferences and internet forums. Books are written. Documentaries are produced. Theories are proposed and debunked. But the Sumerian King List remains, carved in cuneiform on ancient clay, telling its impossible story. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the King List is its matter-of-fact tone. There's no attempt to convince the reader. No arguments for why these incredible claims should be believed. Just a straightforward record. This king ruled this city for this many years. Then the flood came. Then kingship descended again. As if the scribe was simply recording what everyone knew to be true. This mundane treatment of the extraordinary appears throughout Sumerian literature. Gods and humans interact casually. Immortals and mortals share meals. Sky vehicles and earth vehicles are mentioned with equal nonchalance. Either the Sumerians had incredibly vivid imaginations that they never distinguished from reality, or they lived in a world where such things were commonplace. The implications of accepting the King List as historical record are staggering. It would mean human civilization was established by non-human entities. Our religions, governments, and technologies would all trace back to alien intervention. We would not be the products of natural evolution but of deliberate design. Our creators might still be watching, waiting, perhaps preparing to return. The Sumerian texts hint at such a return. They speak of cycles of time, of ages when the gods are present and ages when they are absent. Some researchers interpret Mesopotamian astronomy as predicting these cycles. The precision of the ancient calendars, the obsession with tracking celestial movements, might have been about more than agriculture and religion. They might have been countdown clocks. If the Anunnaki exist and operate on the vast timescales suggested by the King List, a few thousand years of absence means nothing. They could return tomorrow or in another millennium. Their technology would be even more advanced now, their capabilities even more godlike to our eyes. Would they be pleased with what humanity has accomplished? Or would they decide another flood is necessary? These questions trouble those who take the ancient astronaut theory seriously. But most people dismiss the entire concept as fantasy, science fiction projected onto ancient mythology. They sleep soundly, confident that human history is as the textbooks describe, a slow evolution from hunter-gatherers to civilization through purely human ingenuity. Yet the Sumerian King List persists, challenging that comfortable narrative. It sits in museums, accessible to anyone who cares to look. Its impossible numbers and extraordinary claims wait patiently for explanation. Traditional archaeology offers interpretations that satisfy most scholars. But for those willing to consider alternatives, it might be the most important historical document ever discovered. Because if the King List is true, if kingship really was lowered from heaven, if the first rulers really were non-human entities who created and shaped human civilization, then everything we think we know about ourselves is wrong. We are not the masters of our own destiny. We are not alone in the universe. And we are not the first intelligent beings to walk the earth. The ancient Sumerians left us many gifts: writing, mathematics, law, astronomy, and the wheel. But perhaps their greatest gift was this simple list of kings, a record that might contain the true history of human origins. A history of gods and men, of genetic engineering and controlled evolution, of periodic destructions and guided reconstructions. The evidence is there in the clay tablets, waiting to be understood. The impossible reign lengths that might not be impossible. The flood that ended one world and began another. The gradual transition from divine to human rule. The mathematical precision underlying the seemingly arbitrary numbers. The consistent testimony across multiple sources and centuries. Each reader must decide for themselves what the Sumerian King List represents: mythology or history, propaganda or record, fantasy or reality. But remember this: the Sumerians invented writing. They created the first schools, the first libraries, the first historical records. They pioneered the very concept of recording accurate information for future generations. Would such a civilization, obsessed with accurate record-keeping, suddenly abandon all standards when recording their own history? Would they carefully document every business transaction but fabricate their entire royal lineage? Would they precisely track the movement of planets but invent impossible stories about their kings? Or were they simply writing down the truth as they knew it? A truth that included beings from the sky, kings who lived for millennia, and a flood that reset human history. A truth that modern humans find impossible to accept because it challenges our fundamental assumptions about reality. The Sumerian King List remains an enigma, a puzzle that refuses to be solved by conventional means. It exists at the intersection of myth and history, where the impossible meets the verified, where gods become kings and kings become gods. It challenges us to expand our understanding of the past and question our assumptions about human origins. In the end, the King List poses a simple question. What if the Sumerians were telling the truth? What if kingship really was lowered from heaven? What if the Anunnaki really did create and rule humanity? What if we really are the product of alien intervention? And if all of that is true, then the most important question becomes, what happens when they come back? Because according to the Sumerian texts, they always come back. The cycles repeat. The gods return. Kingship is lowered from heaven once more, and humanity must once again serve or be destroyed. The King List doesn't tell us when this will happen, but it tells us it has happened before, multiple times. Each flood, each transfer of kingship, each new dynasty represents a reset, a new chapter in the ongoing relationship between humanity and its creators. We live in an age of technological advancement that mirrors the descriptions of the gods' capabilities. We manipulate genes. We fly through the sky. We communicate instantly across vast distances. We split atoms and reach for the stars. Are we approaching the level where we might challenge our creators? Or attract their attention once again? The Sumerian King List can't answer these questions. It simply provides the data, the long list of impossible kings and their impossible reigns, leaving us to draw our own conclusions. But for those who accept its testimony, the implications are clear. We are not alone. We never were. And our true history is far stranger than we've been taught. The kings of the list ruled for 450,000 years before the flood. If that represents the duration of the Anunnaki presence on Earth, and if they operate on similar timescales, then our entire recorded history is just a blink of an eye to them. Our civilizations, our achievements, our wars and peace, all mere moments in their vast experience. This perspective shifts everything. Our problems become trivial. Our accomplishments become preliminary. Our future becomes uncertain, because we are not writing our own story. We are characters in someone else's narrative, following a script we don't fully understand. But perhaps that's the final message of the Sumerian King List. Not that we are slaves to alien masters, but that we are part of something larger than ourselves. That human history connects to cosmic history. That our origins and destiny extend beyond this single planet and single species. The ancient scribes who carved the King List into clay couldn't have known that their work would survive 4 millennia. They couldn't have imagined that future humans would study their words with electron microscopes and computer algorithms. They simply recorded what they knew, preserving the memory of impossible kings and world-changing floods for whoever might come after. Now we are the ones who come after. We hold their tablets in our museums. We read their words in translation. We debate their meaning in universities and online forums. And we must decide what to do with their testimony. Dismiss it as myth, accept it as history, continue investigating until we find definitive proof one way or another. Each choice has consequences. Each interpretation shapes our understanding of who we are and where we came from. The Sumerian King List waits patiently for our decision, its cuneiform characters preserving an impossible history that might be the most important truth ever recorded. A truth about gods and kings, creators and creations, floods and new beginnings. A truth that began when kingship was lowered from heaven and continues to this day. Because if the Sumerians were right, kingship is still here, still descended from heaven, still connecting humanity to its creators. We just call it by different names now. Government, authority, power. But the principle remains the same. Some rule, others obey, and somewhere above it all, the original powers watch and wait. The King List tells us this has always been the way. From Alulim's 28,800-year reign to the present day, the pattern continues. Kings rise and fall. Cities flourish and crumble. Floods come and recede. But kingship endures, the gift or curse of the Anunnaki, the system they imposed on humanity at the dawn of civilization. Understanding this changes everything, or changes nothing, depending on what we choose to believe. Depending on how we interpret the impossible numbers and extraordinary claims of a 4,000-year-old clay tablet. The Sumerian King List, the first history or the greatest fiction, alien contact or human imagination, the most important document in archaeology or the most elaborate ancient conspiracy theory. The choice is ours to make. But remember, the Sumerians didn't think they were writing mythology. They thought they were writing history. The history of kings who ruled for thousands of years. The history of a flood that destroyed the world. The history of kingship that came from the stars. Their conviction remains encoded in clay, surviving conquests and catastrophes, waiting in museums and private collections, challenging every generation to explain its impossible claims. We are simply the latest in a long line of readers trying to understand what the Sumerians knew that we've forgotten. Perhaps one day we'll have definitive answers. Perhaps archaeology will uncover irrefutable evidence of the Anunnaki. Perhaps contact will be reestablished, and the gods will return to confirm or deny their role in human history. Perhaps the truth will finally be revealed. Until then, we have the King List. That simple, impossible, potentially world-changing list of names and numbers. The record of our beginning, according to humanity's first historians. The testament of the Sumerians, who gave us civilization and perhaps gave us the truth about where it really came from. The story of kingship lowered from heaven. The story of the Anunnaki and their human subjects. The story preserved in cuneiform on ancient clay. The story that might be our story, if we're brave enough to accept it. The Sumerian King List, for 1,000 years old and still keeping its secrets, still challenging our assumptions, still waiting for someone to fully understand its message. The message that kingship came from above, that we are not alone, that our creators might return, that the impossible might be history,